Have you ever wondered what drives the total demand for goods and services in an economy? Well, this is where the concept of aggregate demand, or AD for short, comes into play. This is a term that economists use to describe the total demand for all goods and services within an economy at a specific overall price level during a specific time period. Now, there are several components that make up aggregate demand. First, we have consumption, which is simply the total spending by households. Then there's savings, which is the portion of income that households choose not to spend. Next up is investment. That's the spending by businesses on capital goods. Then we have government spending on public goods and services. Lastly, we have net exports, essentially the difference between what a country exports and what it imports. Understanding these components will give you a clear picture of what influences aggregate demand. So let's dive deeper into each of these components. First up, let's delve into the consumption function. But what is it, you might ask? Well, in the simplest terms, the consumption function is a concept that represents the relationship between total consumer spending and total income in an economy. It's like a snapshot of consumer behavior, showing us how changes in income can lead to changes in spending. Now, within this function, there are two key components that we need to understand: autonomous consumer expenditure and induced consumer expenditure. Let's break these down. Autonomous consumer expenditure, it sounds like a mouthful, right? But don't worry, it's simpler than it sounds. It represents the part of consumption that does not depend on income. Imagine you've got a basic level of expenses, things like rent or groceries, that you'd need to pay for regardless of how much you're earning. That's autonomous consumer expenditure. It's the spending that happens no matter what. On the other hand, we have induced consumer expenditure, and this is the part of consumption that is influenced by income. So think about those extra things you might buy when you get a pay raise, like a new outfit or maybe even a new car. As income increases, so too does induced consumer expenditure. It's directly related to the changes in our earnings. So why do we care about this consumption function? Well, it is a key piece of the puzzle in understanding the dynamics of aggregate demand. It provides a clear picture of how consumer behavior changes with shifts in income, and this information can be invaluable for both businesses and policymakers. These two components, autonomous and induced consumer expenditure, together form the consumption function, and it's their interplay that helps shape the overall demand in an economy. It's like a dance where income leads and consumption follows, creating a rhythm that drives economic activity. So the consumption function is crucial in understanding the dynamics of aggregate demand. It's not just a concept, it's a tool, a way of interpreting the world of economics and making sense of the patterns we see in consumer behavior. Next, we turn our attention to the savings function. What role does it play in aggregate demand? Now, the savings function is a fascinating component of aggregate demand, and it represents the relationship between total income and savings in an economy. It's a key player that helps us unravel the dynamics of how households choose to save or spend their income. Think of the savings function as a mirror image of the consumption function. If the consumption function maps out how much of their income households choose to spend, then the savings function charts out how much they choose to save. And like the consumption function, the savings function also has two main components: autonomous savings and induced savings. Autonomous savings are the part of savings that do not depend on income. This might sound a bit counterintuitive, right? How can we save if we don't have an income? But remember, folks can save money through means other than income, like inheritances or windfalls. So autonomous savings can be a fixed amount that is saved irrespective of income levels. On the other hand, induced savings are those that are influenced by income. These are the savings that come about when households decide to put away a portion of any additional income they earn. So, as income increases, induced savings also go up. By understanding both autonomous and induced savings, we can get a clearer picture of how changes in income can influence savings behavior in an economy. And this is crucial because the level of savings in an economy can impact the level of investment. More savings can mean more funds available for investment, which can in turn influence aggregate demand. In essence, the savings function helps us understand how changes in income affect savings and, consequently, aggregate demand. Now, let's explore the role of investment and the accelerator in aggregate demand. Investment is an essential part of economic activity. It's essentially about businesses spending on capital goods, things like machinery, equipment, and buildings. When businesses invest, they're preparing for future production and growth. And this investment, it comes in two flavors: autonomous and induced. Autonomous investment is like the independent spirit of the business world. It doesn't care about the ups and downs of income. It's determined by factors like technological progress and business expectations. A firm might decide to upgrade its machinery to keep up with the latest technology, or perhaps it sees a promising future market and wants to be ready to seize that opportunity. That's autonomous investment. It simply carries on, regardless of the state of the economy. On the other hand, we have induced investment. This is the more sensitive type, influenced by fluctuations in income. When income levels rise, businesses see more demand for their products. They might need to expand production, so they invest in new capital goods. But when income levels fall, demand drops, and businesses may hold back on investment. So you see, induced investment is reactive, responding to the economic climate. Now let's talk about the accelerator. Picture the economy as a car. When it's going fast, businesses invest more to keep up the pace. That's the accelerator effect. It means that investment levels increase when economic growth is strong. But what happens when the car slows down? Well, businesses apply the brakes on investment. So, the accelerator also means that investment levels decrease when growth is weak. The accelerator is a key concept in understanding why investment can be volatile. It's a kind of feedback loop. Strong growth encourages more investment, which in turn boosts growth. But the reverse is also true. Weak growth discourages investment, which can further weaken growth. So, investment and the accelerator mechanism have a significant impact on aggregate demand. It's a fascinating dance of decision-making and reaction, driving the rhythms of our economy. Lastly, we'll discuss the roles of government spending and net exports in aggregate demand. These two components might seem unrelated, but they both have a significant impact on the economy's overall demand for goods and services. Let's start with government spending. This is the money that the government or public sector spends on various services such as education, healthcare, and infrastructure. Whether it's building a new highway, funding a public school, or providing healthcare services, all these activities involve spending money, which in turn stimulates the economy. The more the government spends, the higher the aggregate demand. It's a direct relationship. But what happens if the government cuts spending? Well, if the government decides to tighten its purse strings, it could lead to a decrease in aggregate demand. This is because there will be less money circulating in the economy, resulting in less consumption and investment. Now let's move on to net exports. Net exports are calculated by subtracting a country's total imports from its total exports. If a country exports more than it imports, it has a positive net export value. This means it's earning more from foreign markets than it's spending, which adds to aggregate demand. On the other hand, if a country imports more than it exports, it has a negative net export value. This means it's spending more on foreign goods and services than it's earning, which reduces aggregate demand. It's important to note that both government spending and net exports are influenced by various factors. For instance, government spending can be affected by political decisions and budget constraints, while net exports can be influenced by exchange rates and global economic conditions. In conclusion, both government spending and net exports play vital roles in determining aggregate demand. They're like two sides of the same coin, each influencing the economy in its unique way. Government spending and net exports, therefore, are key components of aggregate demand. Let's recap what we've learned about aggregate demand. We've taken a deep dive into its components and their determinants, starting with the consumption function. This function, comprising autonomous and induced consumer expenditure, is the backbone of an economy's spending habits. Next, we explored the savings function, which mirrors the consumption function with its autonomous and induced savings. It's a key determinant of the economy's investment potential. Investment, both autonomous and induced, along with the accelerator, plays a crucial role in boosting economic activity. We also discussed government spending, a significant component of aggregate demand that can stimulate or slow down an economy. Lastly, we touched on net exports, which is the balance between a country's exports and imports, and how it influences aggregate demand. With this knowledge, you now have a better understanding of what drives the total demand for goods and services in an economy.